Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. And I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. Today, our very special guest is Juliana Marulanda. She has over 20 years of experience across Wall Street, the nonprofit sector, technology startups, and family-owned businesses. She is the founder of ScaleTime, and they have served over 500 digital agencies. She's been featured in Forbes and Entrepreneur, and Juliana helps uplevel businesses into lean, mean, profitable machines. And I love that. So I'm going to ask her about that. And on average, she and her team create ways to free up at least 30 hours. Let me repeat that. 30 hours a week for her clients so they can have successful agencies that run without them. And founders can find themselves saying, I do what I want, how I want, whenever I want. That's freedom. Juliana is passionate about providing audiences with invaluable tools that they can use instantly to start improving their business. And her wealth of growth secrets and expertise in growth management put owners and marketers on the path to scaling a business. So welcome, Juliana.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to speak to all of you.
Yes. And so let's begin where I always do at the beginning. How did you become, what was your path to being the founder and the CEO of ScaleTime?
Absolutely. So I started off on Wall Street and I was, doing financial models for 16 hours a day. I was living inside of spreadsheets and it wasn't like my favorite thing to do. And so I decided to go off and do operations. And we, and it was in sports and entertainment, which was rather wild. It was a huge contrast from, the analyst room over at UBS. And I was like 21 at the time, and they would just pick me up and drop me off in a new city. I was like a traveling manager for ops, if you can think about this, for, things such as like USTA tennis and Super Bowl and these massive events that had these huge arenas. And at the time, I looked like I was 12. So when I got dropped into a new city and, people were like, who's the manager? I'm like, me. All right. With people that were 2X, 3X, 4X my age, at times. And it was crazy because the gig was, go to the new city and now you have a hiring fair. And in this hiring fair, I was tasked with finding my team. Team was usually anywhere between 40 to 70 people per event. And it was read, all of the stack of resumes that you possibly can, interview 100 people a day, pick your team, get on site, train them for 2 or 3 days across the resources that were on these massive arenas that were like a mile or, 2 kilometers long, 3 kilometers long. Then, go and operate $1 million a week. Rinse, wash, repeat, scale up, scale down. And I did this for about like 9-10 months. And it was insane because I didn't really know how to manage. Like, that was the truth. I was kind of like, I was in a fake it till you make it situation. And what I did know was I knew systems and processes. I knew numbers. I knew what performance was. And my whole job, right, as I was going through this was like, all right, how do I manage less? So for me, managing less was like, okay, I need to be able to train better, right? Train faster and hire better. So my whole mantra became, hire better, train faster, manage less. And, fast forward 20 somewhat years later, it still kind of is the same mantra. It is hire better, train faster, and manage less. Because if we can do that, then we have so much more time to focus on working on the business. And when I started my firm, right, at ScaleTime, I was really thinking, okay, let's do operations. I know it's not the sexiest of things. However, it's so needed so that people can really focus on the growth of the business as opposed to being stuck in the weeds, right? And I'm a big believer, right? My philosophy is that your operations can be your competitive advantage.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but I have to go back to the beginning to ask you what it was like and how did you navigate being a young person? You said you were 21. You said you looked like you were 12 and you were a woman. How did you navigate that with the people that you needed to deal with to make things happen?
I think, like, looking back, there's many times where I was like, oh wow, that was really bad, or treatment wasn't so great. But honestly, I think at the time I was so focused on doing a good job. I was so focused on my own performance of like, what do I need to do and what do I need to learn? And for me, it was basically maximizing my strengths. Every single time I would get to a new place, it was figuring out what were the resources, what were the leverage points, right? Whether they were like people who I needed that were on the court, literally on the court, right? Because we were in like stadiums. Or, it was the people, it was what training was needed. How did I optimize every single time I did something? And, I was based out of Kentucky. And as a woman, a Latina from New York, really spunky, didn't have as much self-awareness around my own identity, thank God, that could have probably deterred me in some situations. And I think it was just really all, for me at least, how do I provide maximum results every single time? And how do I get better every single time so that all of these other variables matter less?
Okay, well, that actually makes a lot of sense because there are certain things you just can't control, like how old you are and you look like you're 12 and you're a woman, like you just can't control that. But it sounds like you controlled everything else that was around you and that's what you needed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and it was funny because when I stepped into these roles, it's like, I've always looked very young, thankfully. I think I appreciate that now more than I did before. and I would go in and I think I relied on my other attributes, right? That, my intelligence, my ability to build rapport, my ability to figure out what people needed in these teams. And so like that way I was able to really establish myself beyond what I looked like. Right. And establish my own value add and authority.
Okay. So I have to ask you, right at the beginning, what does scaling actually mean? Your company is ScaleTime. And so what does it mean to scale a business? And what are some of the mistakes that companies make when they're trying to grow and scale their business?
Well, we can go into technical definitions of scaling, right? Efficiencies of scale and how to maximize our throughput, but I don't want to bore everybody in terms of what that looks like. I think when we think about scaling, oftentimes it's, how much can we grow, right? Can we 2x, 3x, 4x, 10x our business while keeping our quality, right? So that you're not scaling without losing quality. And how do we become efficient along the process so that we are also managing our profits? So that's one way to look at scaling, which is, a traditional way of looking at scaling. But there's also scaling your team, right? Like, how do we scale a high performance team, right? Because your focus may not necessarily be on, growing your revenue or growing your top line. Your focus might be growing your bottom line. Your focus might be scaling your team. It might be scaling a particular part of the business, right? It could be your service offering. And so I think that it's really important when we're thinking about scaling to be real specific with what our goals are. So that way we know which levers we can pull and what to focus on. In terms of, as organizations are growing, mistakes that I've often found is a lack of attention to sales, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, I'm in this whirlwind of I'm selling, but then I'm being pulled back into the weeds, being pulled back into delivery. And we can talk about 7, 8, 9, 10-figure businesses where you have owners that are still, like, okay, they're the main, firefighting chief, right? As opposed to the CEO. You can have a great team and you can still be very established, and there's an account at risk, you're still on deck to go and fix it, right? So how do we make sure that doesn't happen so you can focus on the right things? And as you're growing, you might be on that roller coaster seesaw of sales and delivery. You're getting pulled back into the weeds because owners oftentimes find themselves to be the single point of failure, right? Like, everything from the get-go. And even if others have now taken that over and hopefully like they know more than you still can figure it out enough to fix it. And so how do we make sure that there's enough training and documentation in place so that you don't have to as the owner? And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes, right? It's that lack of really creating the time and capacity for sales and growing a sales team, and really having the operations run as smoothly as it possibly can without you so that you can focus on growth.
Okay, so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about scaling a sales team, because there are two things that I hear from business owners that want to hire a salesperson. They tell me they want to hire a salesperson, and I say, great, what do you have in place for them? And often the answer is nothing. And then the opposite, kind of further down the line for that, is business owners that are managing a team. They don't really want to be managing the team. And they'll say to me that they have somebody that's been around for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, and they're not really producing, and they kind of don't know what to do with them. And it seems to me that's a bad place to be. So let's talk about building a sales team. How do you go about doing that and then scaling that as the company grows?
Yeah. Now, Wendy, I love when people tell me like, I'm going to hire a salesperson, right? And I'm like, great, what kind of salesperson? Because sometimes, like, I think most people, when they think about I'm going to hire a salesperson, it's either this unicorn, like I can do everything salesperson, like I'm going to open, I'm going to close, I'm going to do biz dev, I'm going to do, sales admin, I'm going to do everything. And sometimes, like, if you're just starting out and you're hiring your first quote unquote salesperson, I like to ask, like, where do you need the help, right? Like, are you still closing and you need a sales admin, like someone to just take the gunk out so you can like show up to calls? Do you need someone to help you, do you need someone to help you do biz dev so that you have more calls? Do you need a closer, that's going to get on calls for you and close those deals? So my first question along this salesperson is like, what kind of salesperson do you need? And I think that's an important question to ask first.
Absolutely. because I think sometimes business owners don't realize the differentiation if they're just in a place where they're ready to hire they think they're ready to hire their first salesperson. They don't always know about the differentiation, the way you just broke that down.
Absolutely. And then the other question, can you afford a salesperson, right? Like, because if you're hiring someone who's really, really good, right? Like that's the unicorn. Like I want someone that can just, do it all. I'm like, well, can you afford it? Right. And then do we have the training in place for that person? Because if we're hiring someone junior, right, or someone who's helping us with admin or something like that, right, we're going to need training to train them up, right? Like they're going to need to know, what are the sales assets? What does the communication look like? Do you have templates for, and I'm not saying templates like 100% we're going to take and devoid all of your relationship out of things, but do you have can you 80/20 it so that they can, run through leads? Do they have scripts? Do we have the sales assets for someone junior to train them up, because they're going to need it, right? And if you have someone who's a lot senior, they're going to expect it so that they can hit the ground running. So oftentimes, when I think about this like system, right? Like, do you have a system for sales? And I break down my system into like, do you have a workflow? Do you have a visual pipeline? Is there a CRM? And I'm not talking about email automation. I'm talking about sales, where you're able to track your sales and visually see it. Most salespeople are visual, right? So I'm really a big proponent on having a visual formatted tool where you can move deals along the line so you can see them and you can see where they get bottlenecked. Do we have, that workflow for your deals, right? Like, do you have a 1-call close? Do you have a 2-call close? Are you dealing with bigger organizations and you need to talk to multiple stakeholders? What does that pipeline look like for you? And can someone follow along, right? Then do we have the documentation for them to know how to follow along? Right? Like, do they understand your particular, your offers, your services, how you deliver? Can they assume a sale and talk about onboarding? Can they not? Like, do we have that documentation? Do we have the assets? Right? That's the other one, right? Like, do we have the sales assets so they're not wasting time trying to figure it out or trying to pull stuff together or, diving into your drives to see what's available so that they have something to actually speak to. And then lastly, do we have metrics? Do we have any benchmarks that you've established yourself or your team has established so that when you bring someone on, you know whether or not they're doing a good job? So I think about these 5 pillars as we're building processes for any part of the business. And I think they're so important for sales because that's the oil that's going to run your company.
Yes. And sometimes sales is talked about like it's this magical, creative unicorn, to use your word. So I love what you're saying about the importance of a process, because I hear a lot of business owners say, oh, well, I'm hiring someone with a lot of experience, which is nice. But you still have to have the process and everything in place. So I love what you're saying about this.
Absolutely. Because, you can have someone with tons of experience and they can hit the ground running so much faster if you have your process and you have everything in place, right? Which means that onboarding them is going to be like a lot quicker. Them learning your business. It doesn't matter how great the salesperson is. They still need to learn your business. And I think that's where a lot of, where the difficulty comes in with a lot of owners taking that step to actually hire salespeople, because, they might have been burned before. They're like, oh, these salespeople suck, or, they don't they're not great, or they had this huge resume, but they couldn't make it. And oftentimes it's not that you're the only one that can sell your business, is that you have subject matter expertise, which allows you to be consultative, which allows you to be flexible in a sales call, which allows you to, handle objections and tell clients like, oh my God, your problem is like this other client's problem. And we were able to solve it. And then all of a sudden, magically, they want to work with you. But it's not magical, right? You have case studies that you remember and you use. And so if we're able to transfer that knowledge to a salesperson, they can start ramping up really quickly. We can start affecting their positive effective rate and their closing rate. And they can start creating that ROI that you've been seeking a lot faster than if you don't.
Absolutely. So we are going to pause now for a word from our sponsor. But then when we come back, Juliana, I want to hold your feet to the fire because I want to talk to you about delegation and the difficulty of delegation. And also we're hiring someone to manage a sales team falls into this process. How do you know when you're ready? And how do you go about doing that? So that's what we're going to talk about when we come back. But now, a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. Just about every guest that I've interviewed on the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast has had a free gift for our listeners. And as a matter of fact, Juliana has a free gift for our listeners today. And so what we've done is we have taken all of those gifts and we have put them all in one place just for you. We call it the Salesology Vault, and it's packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts, and we add another gift every single week. We release a podcast on Monday and we add a gift. You can log in as often as you'd like and download as many gifts as you'd like. It's all free. So go to bit.ly/gift vault, or the link to the Salesology Vault is in the show notes. So after you finish listening to this podcast, go to the notes, click on the link, download your gifts. You'll be glad you did. And we are back with my special guest, Juliana Marulanda. She is the founder and CEO of ScaleTime. And we are talking about scaling a sales team, hiring salespeople and scaling that. So I'm curious if you run into this, because I run into it all the time. Why is delegation so hard? And how can a business owner learn to delegate?
I think delegation is hard at first because we're attached, right? We're so attached to things. And whether we're attached to doing the work or the outcome of the work, and I'm not going to go too woo-woo like on this conversation. I think that there's a mindset of our ego is attached to the outcome, right? It's like, like I did this, I can do this, I have 20 years of experience or whatnot, right? Like, enter your number of experiences here. And I think that there's a piece of us, that's attached to doing the work and getting the outcome, right? And there's also a fear of, if I'm not doing it, is it going to be done well? Is it going to be done as good as I do it? Is my reputation going to be on the line? Am I just going to burn through cash? Right. And if we've been burned before, and I think especially with a sales team, it feels like you're throwing your marketing dollars into a dumpster fire. It's like not fun. It is not a fun exercise in business. And I think that there's just a lot that comes with delegating. And so I often think about it as there's also so much trust, right? Like, do I trust this person to get the outcome? Do I trust this team? And I often think about it as like, if we can trust our systems, if we can trust our processes, right? Like if we can fine tune them to know that if we're putting X or Y inputs in, that it's going to get, A and B outputs out, right? Like if we can trust the results of our system and our processes, then we don't have to be as attached to the individuals. And I know that sounds a little harsh, right? Like, and I don't mean it from like, don't love your team or don't have a great culture. Like, you absolutely want that. However, right, things happen, the economy changes, people find other jobs, and losing someone that's really great, or the idea of putting someone into a place is really hard. So if we have that fail safe with a good system and a good process, then a lot of the emotional gunk can be overcome a lot easier.
Yes. And I would imagine if you've got a good process, if you've proved the model, that this particular process, this is how it works, and it does. And it's, first of all, it's easier to let go because you're plugging somebody into the process. And the other part of it, to avoid this person's been around for 7 years and they're not really selling anything. If you have a process that works, because I'm with you, Juliana, if you have a process that works and you plug someone into it and they're not getting the same results that you or other people on your team got, they're either not following the process, which is a problem, or they're not capable of following the process, which is also a problem. And either one of those scenarios is really a clue.
Absolutely. And, and if you have a process that you're measuring, right? Like now we've established some benchmarks. Now we know which KPIs we're looking at, right? Like now we know what fluctuations look like. We're not being held hostage by underperformers because they're just there. And it's so time consuming, right? Often to hire people, right? Unless you have a good hiring process. Time for, for another conversation. But, oftentimes it's like, hiring new people is like soul sucking. And so it's easier to leave an underperformer, especially if you're a nice person, right? You're like, I don't want to fire this person. It's really, I don't want to have these difficult conversations. Then to like actually go and look for someone that's going to really perform for you. And when you have a great process, that becomes so much easier.
So where in this process of hiring salespeople and managing salespeople and having the sales process, at what point should a business owner think about hiring someone else to manage the salespeople and run the process? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that there's an evolution of delegation for every owner, right? Like there's a point where you hit capacity and you can no longer do delivery, right? Then you have to like hire other people to do delivery. And then, you become a de facto manager. And so you have to manage those people. And then it's like, okay, we need managers in place. Same thing with the sales team. You are the de facto sales manager / trainer until you run out of capacity, and there's other opportunities, right? Whether that's building partnerships, whether that's creating, whatever vision you have, right? For you to be able to lead that vision, like now you need to put a manager in place. And just like we talked about having systems for executing on sales, you also need to start building systems to manage and train your sales team, right? Like, do you have scorecards? Does your sales team have a leaderboard? What does that look like? How do you know that people are performing or not? Like, what are the expectations? What are the conversations you're having with that team? What are the performance conversations that need to be had by a manager or trader? And now we start to think of, okay, what do we need, for this sales manager to really manage effectively? Like, do we have sales dashboards so that they have visibility on the entire team? Right? Because now it's not just about having a visual pipeline or a workflow. Now it's about what are the information that we need so that we're not in the weeds as managers, right? Like, do we have dashboards? Do we have scorecards? Is there documentation on what you want, for those performance and coaching conversations to look like? Are there pips in your sales organization, right? Are you going to put people on performance improvement plans or not? Can they have those? Because if not, then we're hiring someone. And oftentimes when we put a manager in place that doesn't have the documentation and training for them to step into their role, then we're doing their role. And it's like, well, I want to be doing these other opportunities, but now I'm managing the sales team, but I'm paying overhead for someone to manage the sales team. Why am I doing their job? Right. And so that's kind of the vicious cycle that sometimes happens when you have an established team.
Yes. And the other thing I see is taking the top salesperson and making them the sales manager. And then that person is responsible not only for their own book of business, but for managing the team. And I'm wondering if you've seen that and what your thoughts are about that.
I think it works with any other position, right? Where you have an individual contributor and now you're transforming them into a manager. And there's a lot of dynamics at play, right? Because then, it's like, oh, well, we're going to go out for drinks or virtual drinks or whatever the fun activity that the sales team is doing. But, now it's like, I'm going from peer to performance evaluator. It's not the same, right? So, also, if you're a really, really top performing sales, person on the team, if you're the top performer, you are most likely going to be making more money than the manager, right? And so now we're looking at, depending on what the structures are, right? So especially in sales. So I think conversations need to be or like, is this something that your top sales manager really wants, right? Because sometimes, it sounds like a nice idea, but sometimes it's not, right? Like in reality, they're like, actually, I want to be making more money. I really like it here. Or do they have a different trajectory, right? Where that career path makes sense. And they're like, okay, this is something that I want to do. And have they been a sales manager in the past? And if not, are you willing to provide them that training?
Yes, a lot of questions that go along with this. This has been such a great conversation, Juliana. Will you put your hand over your heart and promise me that you will come back so we can keep talking about some of these things?
Absolutely. I'm doing it right now for those of you who can't see.
Yeah, she has her hand over her heart. And I know you have a gift for all of our listeners. So please share details. You were telling me a little bit about it before we hit record. Tell me about your gift.
Absolutely. Well, I know that scaling a business and scaling a sales team can be really grueling. And we talked about some of those grueling things that happen. And one of the things that I think is so valuable is to be able to have visibility on where you are in the operations of your business and your sales team. So what we've done is we created something called a scale map. And it's an operational diagnostic that takes you 5 minutes to do. And it uncovers 50 different ops, gains, and gaps. And once you fill it out, we send it to you within 24 hours. And it's in a complete visual format, which is really cool. So, if you got some work to do and you need to create certain things, or if you're like, oh, we're doing pretty well, but now we really need to standardize, or we're doing great, but we want those extra margins. We want more profit. We want, a faster point of scalability. We want to optimize on each of these 50 variables. So that's our gift to you. And I hope you fill it out. We've had over 600 participants fill it out. And it also tells you where you basically stack up to other businesses in your revenue group. And I think that's really good to see so that you know exactly where you are and where you want to go.
Hey, that is a great gift. And I know I'm going to be filling that out as soon as we finish this today. But we are going to put the link to Juliana's gift in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. And where can people find you, Juliana, if they want to connect with you?
Absolutely visit us on our website at scaletime.co, and you can find us posting on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Okay, so we're going to also include all of those links in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on all of the links. And thank you. Thank you for listening today to the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast with my special guest, Juliana Marulanda, who is the founder and CEO of ScaleTime. And if you have found value in listening to today's podcast, then please think about one business owner, one entrepreneur, one sales leader that you think might also find value in listening to this podcast. And please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.